All right. Do we get started?
Yeah.
Perfect. So now we're on the liquid stake securities panel. So let's just start the round of introductions. We can talk about what about you and why are you at the liquid stake security panel? And let's start with Zach. Then we can go left.
Hi guys, I'm Zach from Mitosis. Work very close with some of our partners who are tackling both liquid staked and restaked security for many different AVSs. So it's a very core issue that we are trying to, an initiative that we're trying to work through. And yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, so it's nice to chat here. I'm Sung-Yun from Ether.fi. I'm the head of a platform, so in charge of smart contract and backend related with the protocol operation and its work. It seems we are the only LRT in this discussion, so sorry for that. Yeah, so Ether.fi is, so we are building the LRT, liquid restaking token. So it's different from LST in that it is natively integrated with eigenlayers restaking system. So after you restake, it's still usable, so it's composable to other DeFi strategies. So you can stake, restake, and you can deposit into other DeFis. And now we are expanding this product to what we call cash, where you can use your restaked asset to buy a coffee. So we are launching the credit card in the token 2049 Singapore. Thank you.
Hey guys, Gabriel here. So currently I lead DeFi growth at Mantle. For those who don't know, Mantle is a layer 2 Ethereum network. We also have one of the largest on-chain treasuries in the world. And we also do have a liquid staking protocol called METH or MEF protocol, whichever you prefer. And yeah, happy to be here.
Hey everyone, my name is Jacob Phillips, co-founder of Lombard. Lombard's building a Bitcoin LST on Babylon, and working with a lot of these guys on stage today in one way or another. Just went public early this week with like a public beta, and kind of doing quite well. Have a lot of DeFi integrations coming out the gate, kind of this week, next week. So yeah, exciting times.
Amazing. Thanks for all the introductions. We can jump right into it. So, let's say I'm a new user, right? There is LRTs, there's LSTs. I'm choosing something. How do I choose an LRT, LST based on a risk profile I have? How do LRTs just basically evaluate the risk profile? If I'm depositing money into LRT, what exactly happens? What is the risk that I'm signing up for?
Basically, for this, you're looking across a variety of AVSs. Some of them have a little bit of different ways that they're actually using this. Some of it, for example, like Lombard down there, these guys work with Babylon. So this is looking at POS chains. Some other ones are looking at bridges. So there's multiple different ways that liquidity can be utilized. And I think knowing what the product you're actually helping to secure is a key thing for the users who are looking to actually essentially delegate their assets to these platforms and help secure their services. Yeah. What do you think about this?
Yeah, so when choosing LRT,
Do you want to move the mic closer?
Oh yeah, sorry. Regarding LRTs on risk profiles, so differently from LST, such as Lido or Rocket Pool, where you restake and you choose the operator to restake to, and then the operator decides which AVSs that it will run. But in LRT, it's abstract the concept of restaking away from users, so you don't have the choice on which operators you want to opt in and which ABSs you want to restake to. So you need to really check which operators are associated with your LRT player and which security toolkits it has. So for example, in Ether.fi, we are working with multiple operators for ABS operation, but we own the operator entity as the smart contract, so we can co-manage the operator operations. So for example, if we detect any issue in their operation, we can push the kill switch and stop the operation. And that is just one example, and I know that Puffer is building anti-slashing mechanism in it, so that would be a good feature to consider.
Yeah, I think just adding on to what they've already said, I think regards to LRT is generally for the main, like the typical DeFi user, I don't think they will pretty much care that much about like the AVSs that it's securing. I think what's more important for the average user is that whether this LRT has enough liquidity, whether there is a withdrawal queue, how soon can you withdraw your assets in the event of any catastrophe. I think that's more important to like the average user, given that it generally is one of the determining factors of whether your assets are secure, other than the fact of like slashing, of course. So I think like we've seen some protocols that do not have like withdrawals enabled, like for example like Renzo, Easy Eve. They had like a whole liquidation event because users weren't able to withdraw their assets. So I think these are some considerations for like the certain kinds of risks that you have to look at when you're considering LRTs.
Yeah, and maybe the one thing I'll add on that hasn't kind of been mentioned so far because it's a little bit specific to this sort of restaking paradigm, well, staking or restaking paradigm with Bitcoin is that unlike ETH LRTs that have a common security layer in the form of smart contracts on Ethereum, Bitcoin, you kind of have to make this up. You can't do smart contracts on Bitcoin. So everybody basically has to build like some form of a Bitcoin L2. And because of this, like people are choosing the full spectrum of different custody solutions. Everything from a 2 or 3 multi-sig controlled by the team to working directly with one custodian to what Lombard does is sort of like a decentralized consortium, kind of like a geographically distributed version of WBTC that's DeFi native. So all of those different trust assumptions then bake back into the sort of security profile of the underlying LRT. So in this case, I think maybe the range of the range of risk in the Bitcoin space is much more significant, I think, than what you've seen in the ETH space. And it's one of those things where it doesn't matter until it matters, and it doesn't matter maybe when you're talking to retail, like maybe you can kind of abstract that kind of stuff from them. But when you're talking to the big institutions and people start looking a little bit deeper under the hood, when you're working with the likes of MakerDAO and Aave and whoever else, those kind of things really matter. So yeah, I think the Bitcoin space has a lot to learn from a lot of what the ETH space has spent years and years sort of ironing out, and hopefully Lombard helps push the space forward.
Amazing. That was all very useful. I mean, my next question is, so like, slashing is not enabled, at least for like ETH LRTs now. Like there's no risk of slashing, which means the funds you deposit into like LRT will most likely just stay there because nothing gets slashed. But once slashing is enabled, how do you think LRTs should like do the due diligence to like choose the operators, and like basically what is the end state of like how we think the operator should be chosen that LRTs work on the back end?
Yeah, so I think for this, what you kind of have to consider is who's actually had a bit more of a history in the space. So there's a lot of operators who are working both in the staking as well as the restaking space, some of similar players. So you see a lot of different firms who are both operating like multiple different nodes across ecosystems. So not even just for staking, but also on different chains. So these sort of guys are people with a solid reputation who have something to one, uphold, but also they've kind of proven from like an operational perspective that this is something that they're able to handle. This is not just a random guy off the street who's like, hey, I want to be your operator. These are a lot of industry professionals who have had a long history of this. Yeah, how's EtherFi thinking about this?
I think I can just add a short comment on it. So we are working with a lot of node operators for sure. And when we see how they run the AVS node services for us, I see this field is very premature and we are not ready for it. And when we are running just Ethereum validator nodes, everyone was running the same software in the same way using the off-the-shelf client. But now each ABS requires different spec and different ways of operation. So when we see them run the nodes, and some of them don't understand how it works. And I know why it is that because there are too many applications, right? So, but there are some expert operators who are building some monitoring tools, for example, and they are reporting their performance like in their monthly report. So I think that would be a good way to find the professional operators for you.
Yeah, I think with regards to slashing and node operators, usually what like the misconception that people usually say like it's mainly due to like whether the operator is misbehaving or being dishonest or double signing. I think most of the time actually a lot of these slashing events actually occur from technical issues, not like the operator not being able to sync with the chain itself, and that's usually what causes like the missing and them getting slashed. So I think that should be probably the main consideration, like uptime, how good is their hardware, how good is their redundancies whenever something happens, and yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with Gabe on this one. You know, running proof of stake nodes securely, certainly there is still risk, but this is sort of a problem we've kind of figured out at this point. There's a ton of infrastructure that's been built through the Cosmos ecosystem that's kind of figured this out. And, you know, at this point, I feel like you could, in the whole history of like, call it Atom or one of the early proof of stake chains, you could probably count the number of validator slashes on like a couple hands or something like that. Like it hasn't been that many, and most of them have been pretty blatant errors. So to me, that is sort of like not a solved problem, but not really the risk we're worried about. What you're more worried about is some brand new AVS that hasn't been live in production, you know, writing some faulty code that accidentally slashes you. That's the really scary part. I'm sure, I mean, Jazzy, I'm sure this keeps you up at night much more so than the validator thing. And I mean, what I think is kind of cool about Babylon is, you know, as where we're delegating, you know, in Eigenlayer, I think most of the sort of AVSs that you've seen pop up are brand new chains or brand new sort of experiments. Babylon's actually working with like a lot of, call it, existing or you know, battle-tested proof of stake chains that have been live in production for quite some time. So those, I think, are going to be really good candidates for people to delegate stake to.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, like as you said, like I mean, one of the main things that does keep me up at night is that AVSs are like relatively complicated applications. Like you get bare metal access to the computer, which means there's infinite ways things can go wrong. So especially with staking, like slashing conditions enabled, I just feel like we will see a lot of like slashing events that are not due to like maliciousness, but mainly due to the fact that, hey, like there is a bug in this code somewhere and that causes the whole thing to get slashed. And like, I am not sure how we can like really prevent it or like detect it early on, especially when we have like, yeah, like especially when we have like, for example, LRT providers who choose operators and then the operators choose the AVSs. Like there's a lot of like abstraction away from the user where they can't really control the risk. So like, is there a good solution to deal with that? Like what do we need to build to fix that?
Well, one of the things that I've seen, especially in the space, is so like as you know, you said, okay, slashing is not enabled yet, right? So one of the things I think that is kind of shifting the space a bit is having like guys, for example, like Symbiotic, who essentially have it so you have this customizable like restaking experience where essentially you are able to determine slashing policy by yourself, right? So I know this is like probably a big thing for you guys at EtherFi, and part of the reason why you've also come out with like your Symbiotic like LRT, because you guys also see this, like having something that you guys can customize your own way. I think having this slashing policy predefined and defined also by the people who are building the LRT itself is a pretty innovative concept and allows you to have a more in a way risk off kind of approach, because you have a bit of a more of a known risk, right? But I'd love to hear more about why you guys chose like symbiotic, for example, and also like what your considerations are about this.
I think I don't have much stuff to add regarding symbiotic, to be honest. But regarding eigenlayer, so the definition of a slashing is pretty subjective. It's very vaguely defined, right? So, and that is why they introduced the cool concept of intersubjective slashing. So basically, when the slashing event happens, everyone must come to the table and they need to discuss regarding if they're eligible for slashing or not. And I think after then, we will have the really well-defined and community-driven slashing condition. But at this point, there is no slashing, and everything is very vague. And I think one point to add here is that, so for example, in eigenlayer, they're introducing the concept of unique security. I don't know if it's unique security. So it can define the maximum amount of slashable asset per operator. So that can be one metric that you need to consider when choosing operators that you want to.
I think with regards to slashing, probably go back to like what I said previously, more on like the infrastructure side. I think it is more beneficial to work with node operators that can almost or sort of guarantee like 100% uptime. I think we've seen various instances this year alone and the year before where various cloud services like went down, like AVS goes down, and a bunch of services are offline essentially. And I think right now there's a lot of node operators relying on existing cloud services and infrastructure. And that's kind of like a risk, as it's an external dependency. So I think being able to work with node operators that have sort of redundancy mechanisms or using various cloud services in case one goes offline, then I think that's more important. For us at Mantle, what we're doing and how we're approaching the problem with regards to like slashing is that we are building our own LRT token as well, building on top of our MEF LST, which essentially is a restaking layer agnostic product. So regardless of whether it's eigenlayer, Karak network, symbiotic, we're essentially creating like a vault style product that hedges across these different AVSs. And what that essentially means is that we have redundancy in the event that maybe one of them, something goes wrong and one of them gets slashed. It's only like a small portion of that portfolio, right? So users essentially are being hedged in that regard. So if they do get slashed, it wouldn't be by much.
Yeah, and maybe last thing I'd add is, in addition to redundancy around kind of node operators, I like the way that Eigenlayer at least initially approached it. And I'm sure they'll build upon this sort of structure, which is instead of slashing people immediately, there's kind of like this council that sits behind that can sort of arbitrate over whether this was a correct slash or not. Polkadot used to have something like this that was similar, if I recall correctly, back in the day, where when you got slashed, your stake actually goes to jail, and you have to go like ask the governance to bail you out effectively. And I think that does a ton for node operators, right? Node operators are right 99.999% of the time, but if they're wrong even a little bit, getting your whole stake slashed would really suck. And it sucks even more for, EtherFi and Mantle and Lombard if we build a whole ecosystem upon yield-bearing primitives that then get wiped out with one little mistake. So, I think building into the protocol layer different mechanisms to ensure that, even in the case of accidental, slashings, we can find some sort of way to remunerate, kind of walk those things back, I think goes quite a long way.
Amazing. I think those are all helpful. I think we can move on the topic from slashing for now, since we have talked quite a bit about slashing. So after slashing, so one of the main pillars of like this thing is like liquid, that you're like liquid stake tokens, liquid restake tokens. It really needs to be liquid. So how have we've been like approaching on how to actually make the LRTs more liquid. Like because on the back end there could be withdrawal queues. On the back end there's a lot more problems. But how do we make sure that the UX for a liquid like LST or like an LRT, it is actually liquid?
Yeah, so I guess this is one of the things that Mitosis is tackling pretty heavily. So making sure that protocols who are launching support for assets such as like LBTC, CME, wrapped EtherFi, ETH. Like I think one of the main considerations for protocols looking to support these is like actually how do we get like a base of liquidity to work off of? If you're an AMM and you don't have a lot of liquidity or this liquidity is not tightly around the current price, then you deal with a lot of price impact. And people see, okay, I'm looking to swap this token into this token, and now all of a sudden I like lose a whole lot of my money. And why does this happen? Essentially, it's about like optimizing liquidity and making sure that there's actually a lot of liquidity within these protocols, both from like DEXs as well as lending platforms and around other strategies as well. And these are all kind of collectively all contributing to the liquidity of these actual like LRTs, and most of the reason why you actually want it liquid, right? So that you can have this like transfer of value around to different places. And I think one of the key things for this is that like protocols want some liquidity to launch with, and they were looking to like bootstrap off a strong source, because especially when you look to like people using a lot of aggregators these days, whether you're using like a 1-inch for aggregation of like trades, or whether you're actually using some like lending aggregator of sorts. Like I know there's some of these being built on Arbitrum because it's quite DeFi intensive. I think this focus on making sure that these LRTs are actually used and usage is high is what actually brings them to have quite heavy adoption. For example, if you look at the usage of, let's say, like wrap staked ETH, it's in like over 400 protocols across all these different chains, right? This is one of the reasons why people look at like wrap staked ETH when you're making the comparison from like LST to LRT, and people might think, okay, maybe these LRTs like aren't entirely there yet, but they're getting better, getting more liquid. You look at, okay, you have 400 different protocols that are using this, and then when you come to like LRTs, I think some of the main ones, like for example, you guys are being used in like right about maybe 100 different protocols, something like this. I think this is one of the main considerations, and like it has to be you have to have a very DeFi intensive look at this to actually make sure that these LRTs are liquid. But go ahead, I'd love to hear more from you.
Yeah, thanks for the explanation on behalf of me. And I think I'm repeating what he mentioned before. So to be liquid, it must support the withdrawals from the beginning, and that's a way to protect the RepTEs, the asset, from the market depeg. And obviously we have seen several depegging issues recently, and in order to have that many integrations, we have put a lot of efforts behind to make it possible. So that's the effort, and I think the core part is to add the usability. So you just need to stake, and you are holding in wallet, then you wanna sell it when there is a pressure or some events. But if you actually have a usability with your asset, then we believe that you might stick to it longer, and there will be lower selling pressure.
Yeah, I think adding on to like the question of withdrawal queues and being able to withdraw your assets, I think liquidity on that sense shouldn't be an issue if the withdrawals are open, because users can easily arbitrage on DEXs and easily bring back the peg. The issue we saw with like Renzo's Easy ETH was that they did not have withdrawals open, and a lot of users were essentially looping their Easy ETH assets to maximize their points. And once the token itself depegged due to a lot of users swapping out of the Easy ETH, a lot of users on lending markets and lending protocols that were looping these assets has essentially got liquidated. So I think as long as there's sufficient withdrawals available with the underlying assets from like Beacon Chain, and also there's like existing DEX liquidity, then it shouldn't be an issue. How we are approaching it with CMETH is pretty unique in that sense. Given Mantle has one of the strongest like on-chain treasuries, what we're doing essentially is using protocol-owned liquidity. So we ourselves are providing that liquidity to our native DEXs on Mantle Layer 2 for users to swap in and out of MEF and CMEF in essentially very large sizes, right? Given it's mostly like UniV3 style pools, concentrated liquidity. And also we have a few like RFQ DEXs which essentially is linked up to like centralized market makers, and then you can swap without, essentially with no fee, right? So that's how we are approaching it. And yeah, I think as long as withdrawals are open, that shouldn't be an issue.
So earlier I talked a little bit about how in Bitcoin you see a much broader risk spectrum than maybe what you see in the ETH space. And I think, even in the ETH space, I think that there's like a big spectrum of people making different design decisions that then create different risk profiles. And I mean, I think what's most interesting here is like, we're kind of talking about all of us are so deep in the mechanics of these mechanisms that, we're sort of, these things come to mind. It's like for, when we're sort of designing these things. But like a user's never thinking about whether my LRT has a withdraw queue or not, or they certainly shouldn't have to, nor should they have to, make a judgment call on whether, EtherFi or Lombard can properly delegate to, AVSs that are technically secure or something like that. These are just not things that are going to come up. And so, one thing I found is that, people trend towards optionality when a lot of times for the types of primitives we're trying to build in crypto, which are, base layer financial primitives that will form the foundation for a massive ecosystem, choice actually isn't always a good thing. Certainly experimentation is good and it's good to sort of try these things out. But at the end of the day, we're not trying to create subjective risk or subjective primitives. We're trying to create primitives with objective risk profiles that are like near nothing, Like when you think about, building upon a primitive, WBTC is a great example of this, right? Like out of nowhere, that base layer primitive made a business decision to go do something that everybody thought was crazy, right? And in this case, it's like you don't want your LRTs or your LSTs to be making turns on a dime or making decisions that are sort of, whatever they think is best. What we want to do is like, you never have to think about whether your smart contract is going to execute according to plan or if it's going to make a sort of subjective decision. So, I mean, I think this is the sort of place that this whole space is still pretty immature. We are, AVSs are just now turning on rewards, like the game's just getting going, but expect this to be like a pretty big problem in sort of the construction of DAO and sort of like DeFi protocol operations, because there is a lot of like operational overhead that goes into sort of producing these primitives, but over time it's going to have to become a lot less subjective and more objective.
Amazing. I think those are all great answers. I think we're running out of time, so I think we can give it to each of the panelists if you have any closing thoughts, and maybe you can shield your protocols.
Well, with Mitosis, essentially we're building a L1 chain with ecosystem on liquidity. The main focus of us is kind of split. It's between both our EOL side on multiple different chains as well as our L1 side. So we have a full ecosystem that's being built on our chain of both lending protocols, DEXs, prediction markets, basically the whole ecosystem. And then we also have this like EOL Vault primitive, which is being brought to many new chains, budding chains with many new protocols who are all looking to sort of receive liquidity. So they're looking to try to support like the liquidity of LRTs. So when you're, for example, I heard it was brought up that, okay, someone's trying to arbitrage some DEX, right? So I guess when people ask, okay, how do you arbitrage on a DEX? A lot of players are using like a lending platform, and they're using flash swaps, right, to arbitrage with DEXs. So I guess arbitrage on the DEXs is somewhat reliant on the actual lending protocol liquidity. So this is why you sort of need a whole like fully butted ecosystem to actually have a efficient market. And this is something that Mitosis is supporting through our EOL effort, but we're also supporting this across a variety of assets as well. Yeah. I'll pass it over because I know we're running out of time.
I'm making sure. So as I said, we are launching the cash credit card in token 2049. So you will stake with us and restake, and you can deploy into several DeFi strategies, and you can still spend. So we want you to stay with us and spend with your yield. That is what we are going to provide. Thank you.
Awesome. So on the Mantle side of things, I think what's next for us in our roadmap is definitely CMETH, which is our expansion of the MEF LST, which is essentially the LRT version of MEF. So it's going to be a pretty interesting product, I feel. It's going to be restaking protocol agnostic. It's going to be like a vault product that is yield optimizing as we go along. So whenever there's new AVSs that spin up, we can always pivot, and it's very flexible to integrate with any other like whitelisted strategies. And that should be coming soon. But I think what the more important part is that it's a very composable asset. It's going to be utilized throughout the whole Mantle DeFi ecosystem. You can use it in lending markets, DeFi protocols, you name it. And eventually, it will be expanding to other chains and more. So that is on the horizon.
Awesome. And on Lombard's side, I'd say the biggest thing I'd ask is that people not sleep on Bitcoin. DeFi and restaking were both built upon ETH natively, but with the launch of Babylon here coming soon, I think a lot of people are going to be surprised at how much liquidity is going to flow. We just had sort of the first cap of Babylon a couple weeks ago. People, projects were paying millions of dollars to get into to get a slot in the first sort of 250 BTC, and that's just the beginning. Babylon's going to go live here within the next month and a half or so. They'll lift the caps, and I think at that point, we'll kind of be off to the races. I think one of my sort of hot takes here is that Eigenlayer and Symbiotic are going to be flipped by Babylon in a matter of 6 to 12 months. It's crazy how much Bitcoin is excited to come online. So anyway, Lombard just went live this week. I have about $250 million in TVL, about 45 million in DeFi TVL. We're working super closely with the EtherFi guys to launch sort of restaked Bitcoin eBTC. And I think this is the beginning of sort of a new era for DeFi, where ETH and USDC aren't the only assets you can use. We're sort of going back to the roots of crypto and building everything upon Bitcoin. So staked Bitcoin being a core catalyst in making that happen.
Yeah, we saw your quite high fees on Bitcoin at the launch. Quite impressive, sir. Don't worry.
Yeah, it's crazy. But look, it just goes to show how much demand there is. That's what.
Yeah.
Babylon flipping, that's crazy. That's crazy. All right, I think, thanks to everyone here. This was, everyone showing up, and this was a great panel.